As I get into part two of this rather long story, I just want to say thanks to everyone who took the time to watch the first part of this. And I did make a playlist titled The Redhead Murders. And I'm going to put all these videos together in that playlist. As quite a few of these killings took place, or at least the bodies were found in Tennessee, Arkansas, Missouri, Mississippi, Kentucky, all along Knox County, Kentucky, where one of the women in this next part of this story was found, is very close to Tennessee. It's, in the southern part of Kentucky, central part of Kentucky. So I started thinking this man, that this Wise, who was a truck driver, and he died in 1999. He was linked, after his death, of course, the DNA was linked back to him in at least one of these murders. Stacy Lynn Chahorsky, and her body was found disposed of, and many, many years later, it was linked back to the DNA of this Wise, who died in 1999. So I just wonder if they have found any other unknown or deceased women, murdered women, and if they have tested their DNA against the DNA that was found on her and against his DNA, or this Jerry Leon Johns, who went to jail for the kidnapping and attempted murder. But he definitely did intend to kill her, and he told her as much. And he was also linked later, after his own death. His DNA was linked to another one of these women, Tina Farmer. So there's many others out there that their cases still haven't been solved. I'm going to talk about a few of those here today. Some of these are thought to have been connected and some weren't. There's one that I'm going to speak on that I don't think was connected. I think her case was that of a partner murder, and I'll get into that. I just want to say thanks for coming back to watch this. So there's more to this story. There's so many layers to this story, but I wanted to talk about this one part. It's how students, and this is from People online. I was looking for a date. This was dated last year, 2024. How a group of high school students help crack the Redhead murders cold case. The victims, most of whom were found dumped along major highways in Tennessee, Kentucky, Arkansas, Mississippi, and West Virginia. A group of Tennessee high school students are bringing to light a series of cold case murders that have stumped law enforcement for more than 4 decades. The murders were dubbed the Redhead murders because all of the victims had reddish hair. These murders they say the murders began in the 1970s, but they actually began to find victims in the 1970s. There could be victims, before this. It is believed that the killer was probably a truck driver and picked up women at truck stops, or women who may have been hitchhiking, and he may have, like I said in the one case of Tracy Sue Walker, who went missing in Indiana and was found in Tennessee. He may have been very kind and nice and sweet to these women in the beginning and earned their trust, and they may have traveled with him through, distances, or he may have gotten them into his truck, murdered them very quickly, and then driven on to a destination far away from where he picked them up at. But either way, some of the women were found closer to their homes and others were found farther away. And a couple of the women have still not been identified, so they're not really sure. But the Elizabethtown High School students began to work on the case in the spring of 2018. This was part of a sociology class and is now featured in a 10-episode podcast called Murder 101. I'll see if I can find a link to that that's still active, and if I can, I'll post it at the end of this video. Their teacher, Alex Campbell, says he brought the case to the attention of his students because he wanted to get them involved in projects as a group where they can apply what they are learning in their classes. I had never heard about the murders even though I've lived here my entire life. They had these murders, but nobody ever came to a decision about whether or not one person was responsible and if this was an active serial killer. The goal of the students was to uncover whether the killings were the work of one man. They even got assistance from a former FBI agent who helped them learn how to profile a case. They saw a potential pattern in 6 of the 14 murders, and they even helped to identify one of the victims, Tina McKinney Farmer. Tina McKinney Farmer was found dead on January the 1st, 1985. Her body had been strangled and bound and was disposed along Interstate 75 in Campbell County, Tennessee. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation was able to link DNA found at the crime scene to Jerry Johns, who died in prison in 2015 after he was convicted in 1987 of the attempted murder of a woman he picked up, strangled, and dumped on Interstate 40. After poring through the files and talking to the former detectives, the students believe that there is a strong evidence to show that whoever killed Tina McKinney Farmer also probably killed Lisa Nichols, Michelle Inman, Elizabeth Lamont, Tracy Walker, and 2 unidentified women. Now, a spokesperson for the TBI tells this magazine that the investigation into Michelle Inman, Elizabeth Lamont, and Tracy Walker are all still open, active cases. So they have found nothing that they can link so far. And there's no evidence that he was responsible for these deaths. Michelle Inman was only recently identified, and they're still investigating her background and who she may have had contact with, what was going on with her. There were so many different victims of this killer, or killers if it wasn't the same person killing each of these women, but each of them deserved their story to be told. And like I said, I've already told the story of Tracy Walker, and this is the story of Tina Marie Farmer. This was from Find a Grave. Loved ones in Indianapolis last saw Tina Marie McKinney Farmer on Thanksgiving Day, 1984. The 20-year-old was the first reported missing not long after Thanksgiving Day. Now keep in mind, Tracy Walker, once again, was also from that same area. In 1992, Hubbs said her sister Sandra Price called Indianapolis police again, telling them that she had been gone for 8 years and her family wanted answers. They wanted to know if the police was even still looking for her or if they had even really looked for her. A body found on January the 1st, 1985, off of Interstate 75 near Jellicoe, Tennessee, was identified as Farmer. A spokesperson said that an agent received a tip about a blog publicizing missing persons. Now, this was the teenage students at this high school in Tennessee who started this project to help identify these women, to help identify who might have killed them, and they came up with their own blog, and the police got involved in that. And the teacher feels like that the students did more work on these cases than the FBI or the TBI or any other states that were investigating these missing women all put together. And the police get involved, and then they don't want to give credit to these students for helping to locate the identities of some of these women and the possibility that they were connected to one killer. Investigators were able to get fingerprints and DNA and match the DNA to members of Tina Farmer's family. And she had been arrested in 1983, so her fingerprints were on record. And they were finally able to identify this Jane Doe, and her family was finally able to find out where their sister and their daughter had been for so many years. But they still didn't know how she got there and what happened to her. And while she was a Jane Doe, she had long been associated with a suspected serial killer linked to the so-called Redhead murders. Her death was among 11 unsolved homicides, with bodies found in Tennessee along highways from 1978 to 1992. And I go back to the case of Susan Lund. I believe that there's a very good possibility that she was a victim of this same man, because this is very close to, she went missing in Clarksville, Tennessee, which is just on the border of Kentucky. It's in the northwestern part of the state of Tennessee, and her remains were found in Indiana about a month later. But only her head was recovered. They were never able to get DNA or anything off of her because there was no other remains of her body found. And they don't know the cause of death, but it's a very good possibility that she could have been stabbed or but I believe that most of these women were suffocated or strangled. Now it goes on to talk about the students and how they got together and worked on these cases, and 6 cases that they were able to link together were reported between 1983 and 1985. They all had similarities. The victims were all young white women with red hair, and they were all slight builds. The TBI says that they were called in to assist Campbell County Sheriff's Office after the body of an unidentified woman was found on I-75 in Campbell County. Now, we now know that this was Tina Farmer. Autopsy results revealed she had likely been there for several days, and at the time that she was discovered, authorities were unable to identify her. For 33 years, she remained a Jane Doe, and they were able to come to the conclusion that this was 21-year-old Tina Marie McKinney Farmer, who had been reported years earlier in Indianapolis. And even though a lot of these women were thought to maybe have been what they would term transients, meaning that they were really not, they were homeless or they were just people that traveled around. Maybe they were estranged from their families. Some of them were thought maybe to have been prostitutes, hitchhiking around truck stops where they may have come into contact with this man, because it is believed that he was a truck driver. And just because they may have been estranged from their families, there still may be someone in their family out there who wonder whatever happened to them. And maybe at some point they were reported missing. And back in this time, in the early 80s, before DNA, before these databases connected everybody, and before the internet, it was harder to locate people. And a lot of police departments, I will say, were limited. Some of them were limited in what they were able to do, and some of them just took the report and left it there. So today what I want to talk about is the actual man that they believe to be the serial killer. At least they know he is responsible for 1 murder and possibly more. And I just wanted to tell a little bit about him. And this is from the website Appalachia Unsolved. The trucker who liked redheads. Jerry L. Johns worked as an independent truck driver in the 1970s and 80s. Authorities are checking for links between his travels and unsolved killings. In life, Jerry Leon Johns liked to boast that he'd never hurt a woman, and no one could prove otherwise. In death, his crimes may finally be catching up to him. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation announced in December, now let me go back just a little, this was posted in 2020, and in December, a grand jury has determined that the Rockford, Illinois man likely killed a woman found strangled and bound on January the 1st, 1985, along Interstate 75 in Campbell County. We now know that this was Tina McKinney Farmer. Johns died in 2015. Investigators have often wondered about the truck driver who was convicted in 1987 of attacking a woman he met at a Knox County adult club. 35 years ago, there was speculation that he might be the man behind what would become known as the Redhead murders. But he was never charged with murder. There was not enough evidence. Could he have, and one link that all these women seemed to have was that they all had red hair. It was years after the Campbell County killing that authorities were able to show DNA found on the victim's shirt and blanket that she was wrapped up in matched that of John's. Back in the 1980s, the testing tools were limited and primitive. So who knows what else police would have been able to find if they'd had the ability that they have today, that they could have linked him then to these other, unsolved cases. They believe it could be also possible that the police caught him before he was able to kill again. I'm not sure about that because, like I said, there could be murders that took place long before this happened and just have never really been linked to him. And there could be some out there that still have never even been found. Johns was arrogant and condescending with the cops. He acted like he was smarter than everyone, and he boasted about his knowledge of serial killers. "You never know where evil people lurk," he said. Local interest grew intense in the 1980s as women's bodies started turning up in the South. Often they were found along highways like Interstate 81, 75, and 40. Often the women had been bound and strangled, and they had red hair, which dubbed the nickname the Redhead murders. They couldn't identify her at the time and wouldn't be able to for decades. They believed she had been dead for several days, and an autopsy determined that she was pregnant. We started going to places all over Kentucky trying to identify her. We put up posters, and then we started hearing from Kentucky State Police saying that they had another female homicide on the interstate. Authorities in Arkansas, Mississippi, and Ohio started comparing notes about these cases. Looking back, Davenport and Elkins say it was clear the crimes weren't all related. It was logical, though, at the time that they wanted to determine if that was the case or not. And getting a lot of weigh-in from the media led them to really look into that because they wanted to put the people at ease, maybe, let the people know the media was talking about these bodies and it had people afraid. So they were really looking into it and trying to, determine whether or not these were linked. In March of 1985, attention began to focus on Johns after he was arrested driving the car of a woman he had picked up at a nightclub, a notorious adult club called the Catch One. The woman told police that he had tried to strangle her and left her for dead in a culvert off of I-40. This woman also had red hair. Johns was 36 at the time and owned his own small trucking operation called Rebel Trucking out of Cleveland, Tennessee. He and his brother Wayne Johns went to the catch the night of March the 5th, 1985. This was only 2 months after the body of Tina Farmer was discarded in the same area. The dancer agreed to go with him to a Knoxville motel to have sex with him for $200. Johns tore $200 bills in half and gave her two of the halves and told her that she would get the other two halves when the act was finished. So she had another woman with her, another dancer at the club, and she arranged for this woman to go along with them to be with his brother, Wayne. So everyone drove their own car to the Holiday Inn on Dale Avenue, and Tasha hid the two halves of the $100 bills in her car, which was a Datsun 280Z. John's got adjoining rooms for him and his brother, and he had a gun with him, and he told the dancer that he was an undercover Texas Ranger, which of course was a lie, but he drove a pickup truck that had a Texas license plate on it. After the sex, she took a shower and prepared to leave, but Johns had other ideas. They walked together outside to her Datsun, and he forced her into the car. Now, this woman was expecting him to give her the other halves of this money, is what she agreed to, so she was still kind of expecting that when they walked outside, and this is the reason he told her that he was walking outside with her, and then he forced her into her own car. So he drove her back to the parking lot of the club where he had picked her up at, and he ripped up her t-shirt into strips and used them to bound her feet and hands, and he put a gag in her mouth and threatened to kill her if she tried to get out of the car. He headed west on I-40 and found some woods where he pulled the sports car over next to the road. He forced her to walk with him out into the woods, and she asked him if he was going to kill her, and he said yes. She said why, and he said, "You've become a nuisance." He was angry, she told authorities, because he had discovered she wasn't a real redhead. She had dyed her hair, and he told her that she had lied to him about being a real redhead. He taunted her with the pistol, but rather than shoot her, he wrapped a strip of the shirt tightly around her neck and strangled her until she passed out. She survived, however, and she would later tell authorities she came to a culvert. Apparently she passed out, and he put her body inside this culvert thinking that she was dead, and he left her there. But she woke up, and she survived, and she crawled out of the culvert. She made it back out of the woods to the interstate where she flagged down a truck. She was afraid of the people that stopped to pick her up. She thought that they might have been also with this man, and she was, very afraid. She told troopers who responded to the scene what had happened, and she said Johns had driven off in her car, leaving her in the woods thinking that she was dead. She was taken to the Park West Hospital on Cedar Bluff Road, and Knox County authorities headed to the Holiday Inn. A trooper spotted John's pickup truck in the parking lot, and the men saw the Datsun approach the lot, but when he saw the police there, he fled away, and a chase began on I-40. After getting off of the business loop, the 280Z crossed the median and slid into the exit lane before coming to a stop. Inside the car, police found John's loaded gun. During questioning, authorities found that Johns had a Holiday Inn motel room key, $750 in cash, and a Catch One membership card. And he also had the other two halves of the $100 the $200 bills that he had promised to give this woman. The jury found the evidence was enough to convict him, and he received a long sentence behind Tennessee bars. Friends and family members tried to convince the judge to show mercy. They insisted that he was a good family man who took very good care of his family. They wrote that he and his wife had gone through hard times losing a young son. Few mentioned that he had a felony criminal record in Mississippi. Johns would never leave prison, and he wrote many petitions insisting that he should be released because authorities had the wrong man. In February of 1986, the woman known only as Tasha sued Johns in Knox County Circuit Court for pain and suffering, emotional abuse and suffering. And Johns then turned around and sued her in the same court. In the contention of the plaintiff, he sued her saying that she was perpetrating fraud upon him and that none of this had ever really happened, that she had made the whole story up. I want to talk a little bit more. During the 90s and up into the 2000s, as forensic science improved, analysts became able to identify suspects through DNA. The Campbell County case had particular meaning for Elkins, and they're talking now about the one that was Tina Farmer. He never forgot about the woman who was found bound in the blanket, and he kept working on that case. In 2016, he resubmitted the blanket and the shirt to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation Crime Lab, and he got a break. Testing showed that John's DNA was found on both items. Johns indeed had been the one responsible for the murder of the red-headed woman found dumped beside the roadway in Jellicoe, Tennessee. Unfortunately, Johns had already died. He died in prison in 2015 at the age of 67. It was a surreal moment to discover after all these years that we finally knew who killed this woman and that he himself was dead. And so there was really nothing that they could do at that point. Well, in 2018, so in 2015 when they discovered his DNA on the blanket and the shirt, they still didn't have her identity. It wasn't until 2018 that they were able to match her to a family member in Indiana. This was the exact same scenario with Tracy Walker, who was also found near Knoxville. And so it's hard to imagine that these cases are not related, but, you know, strange things happen. But to have a girl go missing, have two women go missing from Indiana and end up very close to each other, discarded, murdered in Tennessee, very near each other, when there are other women in the same areas. And then I go back once again to Susan Lund, who may or may not have been a victim of this man, but she was a red-headed woman. She was known to be hitchhiking that night. She had gone to the grocery store and was trying to hitchhike back home, it's believed. And her head was later found in Indiana, and she was in Clarksville, Tennessee when she went missing, so very close to Knoxville in this area. So it's just kind of like, you know, a puzzle. But at this current time, now this was 2020 as this was being written, we still have not made any connections connecting Johns to the other cases, but we are definitely looking, and we believe that he may be responsible for other victims out there. And we are trying to get DNA profiles. There are still a couple of Jane Does that still have not been identified. And the police say that they're going back over these cold cases, and there's a possibility that it could end up being that Johns was responsible for more murders. And that was really all that I could find on him. I just wanted to share that little bit because this incident at this hotel this night with this woman led them to being able to get his DNA once he was arrested. And hopefully they have tested, if they were able to find any DNA on any items in these other cases, that maybe eventually they'll be able to link them either to him or to somebody whose body was found discarded in a similar way, was known for many years as the DeSoto County Jane Doe. And it was later discovered through DNA testing that this was Lori Ann Mealer Pennell, Pennell. So Lori Ann was 22 years old and she went missing from West Memphis, Arkansas. She disappeared in 1982. Her body was discovered on January the 24th, 1985 in Olive Branch, Mississippi. And she was not identified until March the 1st of 2024. So just about less than a year ago. Her cause of death was strangulation and exposure. Lori Ann was born September the 6th, 1962. She was identified through DNA. She was last seen alive at a West Memphis, Arkansas truck stop sometime in 1982. Not long after this, she was reported missing by her family. Lori's body was found by a truck driver driving southbound on U.S. Highway 78, 100 feet east of Coldwater River Bridge at 7:30 a.m. Her body was 20 feet south of the highway. Her shoes, undergarments, and jacket were missing. She was strangled with a ligature and possibly sexually assaulted. Now, Lori's characteristics was that she had wavy, medium-length, strawberry to darker blonde red hair, and she had very freckled complexion. She had triple piercings, and she was known to have somewhat poor hygiene. They said that she would bite her fingernails very deeply down to where there were no fingernails, really, because she bit them so much. Many years simply as DeSoto County Jane Doe. Her body was discovered in January of 1985. She was found just east of the Coldwater River Bridge in Olive Branch, Mississippi. This was in DeSoto County. And the police found her body was found by a truck driver, and the police determined that she was a female of about 110 pounds and about 5 foot 3 inches tall. They estimated her to be about 20 to 35 years of age. Details of her case were entered into NamUs, and although her face was unrecognizable, her identity and the cold case went on for 40 years. In 2022, working with the DeSoto County Sheriff's Office, Othram Labs in Texas used DNA and forensic evidence to test and identified the woman. So a follow-up investigation led investigators to relatives of the murdered woman through DNA, and they were able to find her identity as Lori Ann Mealer Pennell. She was born September 6, 1962 in Missouri. She was last seen at a West Memphis truck stop in 1982, and her family had filed a missing person report at that time. But I want to talk about this one. This one's a little bit different, in my opinion, than the others. And I looked at Find a Grave for this woman, and I found a little bit about her family. But it doesn't go into a lot of detail. It does say that it does list a husband, but it doesn't say if they were still married. And it says she has one brother, and that was how they were able to identify this woman through DNA. And he said they had become estranged in the 80s. And I don't know if the family had made any attempts to contact her during the 80s, 90s, 2000s, or if they thought that she had just decided to go off and, forget about her family. It doesn't go into any details about her husband, if they were married legally, still together at the time, or separated, or divorced. But this woman was known for 40 years as Pulaski County Jane Doe. And it was 40 years to the date of her discovery that her identity was found. And she was found 40 years earlier at a low water crossing near Dixon in Pulaski County, Missouri. According to a press release, the woman was identified as Jane Doe, and 40 years later, she was identified as Karen K. Nippers, Knippers. Her body was discovered on May the 25th, 1981, near Highway MM at a low water crossing. Police believe she had only been dead for a short period of time, maybe even just a matter of hours, up to 5 hours maybe or less, when her body was found. She had been beaten and strangled with a pair of pantyhose that was still wrapped around her neck. And she was left in this shallow water. Police don't believe, and here's where I was saying that this case is a little different than some of the others. They don't believe that this woman was a prostitute. They don't believe she was a transient or that she was out on the streets or anything of that nature because of her appearance. And because of the dental work that she'd had done, she was well kept. She was well groomed and just didn't match some of the other women's appearances and backgrounds. She was wearing stylish clothing, and she had expensive dental work, and she had a good general appearance, and the coroner determined that she was in good general health. Found no signs of any type of drug use or anything, that would appear on her body. But they could not identify her, and she was buried in a Waynesville cemetery marked Jane Doe. That could have been the end of the story, but it wasn't. In 2012, Lieutenant Dottie Taylor of the Missouri State Highway Patrol entered her profile into NamUs, and they continued searching for answers through the years. Now, her body was exhumed in 2015, and the coroner got a court order to extract DNA. And after examinations by several agencies around the country, in December of that year, a group called the DNA Doe Project came up with a name and a possible relative in Alexandria, Virginia. The relative told detectives that he did have a sister who had disappeared in the 1980s, and he did provide a DNA sample. The DNA testing showed that this was a match and that she was his sister. And then at a press conference, the Sheriff's Department said it was continuing to look at her case and to try to find out who may have killed her. They don't believe that she was living a lifestyle that would have put her in danger, and that it's possible that she had just been abducted, maybe by chance. Maybe she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And if she was estranged from her husband or they were divorced and she was a single woman, this could have been someone that she met and went out with, and they don't know. But through her brother, they learned that she had been born in Florida, and she was born December 5th, 1948. She had only been living in St. Louis, Missouri for a very short period of time when she was murdered. So this also could have been a part of what happened to her, is that she didn't really know a lot of people in that area, and maybe she came into contact with someone she thought she could trust. They don't know what brought her to Pulaski County on that date. I think she was brought there. I don't think that it's possible that she could have traveled there for some reason, but I believe it's possible, just like most of these other victims, that she was transported there. And the Sheriff's Department took up a collection to give her a headstone. And there's really not much more about her. And this one is Greene County, Tennessee. It's been 33 years, now this was dated 2018. It's been 33 years since 2 Greene County detectives were called to the scene of a body found along Interstate 81 near exit 44. Even though it's been decades, both men, now retired, remember April 14th, 1985 very clearly. She was discovered in 1985, and she went unnamed until 2018 when it was discovered through DNA testing that she was 17-year-old Elizabeth Lamont of Manchester, New Hampshire. Both William Carter and Hoot Bowers knew her only as Jane Doe since the day they were called to investigate the discovery of her body. Carter says he can still remember getting the call. The body was badly decomposed. There was no identification. We didn't have any idea who she was or where she came from, he said. He was a detective at the time and explained what it was like being on the scene. We were trained not to disturb anything. We were told to just stand by the body, take notes, and observe, and to wait for, I guess, the coroner to come to collect the body. We were trying to determine how long she had been there, the condition of the body, and the surrounding area. And he goes on to talk about them taking photographs and how the investigation was limited back at that time in 1980s. They didn't have the forensic testing that they do now. The only choice we had was to recover the body and try to determine the cause of death. But our investigative techniques were not all that advanced at that time. It would be more than 30 years before they would know who she was. She had not been reported missing during all this time. Her family reported her missing in 2017. And they submitted their own DNA samples, which were entered into these databases, and they were able to get a match to this Jane Doe. And her name was Elizabeth Lamont, and she was 17 years old, of Manchester, New Hampshire. A critical part of finding out who she was is trying to find out how she got to Tennessee and who killed her. We were trying to find out what was maybe going on in her life at the time, who she might have been around. Was she a runaway? Was this something that she did quite a bit? Is this the reason why the family didn't report her missing for so many years? Now, there's a story here that I came upon. I'm going to just mention this story real quickly. I'm going to do a little bit more in-depth research into this case. And I believe, I don't know, it's not said here in this story that she's considered a victim of this Redhead murderer, but I think that she very well might be. Jane Doe, killed in Ohio, identified 36 years later. The woman is now known to be Marcia L. King of North Little Rock, Arkansas. She was 21 years old when she was killed in 1981. The use of new technology and advanced investigation techniques helped to identify her. She was known only as Jane Doe since April the 24th, 1981, when her body was found, and she had been killed by strangulation and blunt force trauma. She was known as Buckskin Jane Doe because of the type of coat she was found to be wearing. Police said she had ties to Kentucky, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. And that's really all there is on her story in this, but I am going to look her up and continue to search for more about her, because it's possible, because of her photograph, that was what stood out to me. She wasn't listed as a victim of the red-headed murders, but when you see her photograph, you see that she did have red hair. She was a young girl, 21 years old, I believe they said, and she fits the description of a lot of these other women. And whether or not these are all women related to the same killer, a lot of people believe that they are. And was it this Terry Johns who went to prison for his role in kidnapping and attempted murder of this? In the story that I talked about, they called her Tasha. And she was a stripper at a strip club in Tennessee. But it was later she came out and told her story, and her name was Linda Shackey. And he had attempted to murder her, and this is the reason that he went to prison. And he died in prison. And he was linked, his DNA was linked to another woman in this story, and possibly others if they were able to find DNA on any of the clothing or other evidence on their bodies or anything like that. Now, if you remember in the story of Tasha, and he had taken her to a hotel, and after they had had sex, she had took a shower, thinking that everything was okay. He hadn't become violent or aggressive or anything at that point. It wasn't until later on that night that he became violent with her and tied her up, bound her, tried to strangle her, left her in the woods for dead. But she survived and was able to identify him. Is it possible that some of these other women, he also had the same means of taking them to a hotel or something of that nature, and they were taking a shower? Maybe he got them some food, he was kind to them, nice, and they trusted him, and then that was when he turned on them. So I'm going to wrap up part 2 of this story. I knew that these videos were going to be long, and I don't like to keep my videos very long, but I didn't feel like I could do justice to these women's stories, and there's so many details about them that I've probably haven't been able to find or just overlooked. But I just wanted to give some brief mentions of each one of these women that were thought to be victims of this killer. So I hope that you'll come back and watch the third part of this, and if I find more information on some of these women, I'd love to find some more out about Elizabeth Lamott. I probably am going to do a update on her story, because there was another possibility of what might have happened to her, and I'm going to look into that and see what I can find. I would love to find more out about this buckskin Jane Doe, Marcia King. I'd love to find out more about her life and do a story about her individually. And I hope you'll come back and watch the third part. Thanks for watching.